Hello and welcome. During this video, we are going to walk through how to set up the mobile intake forms that are digitally sent out to your client when using the mobile intake feature in Centerpiece. Before we get started, I want to point out that I'm assuming that everyone watching this video has already watched the mobile intake overview video. Now, if you haven't watched that, I highly recommend that you go back and watch that video before proceeding with this one. Okay, so during the previous overview video, we walked through all 3 steps of mobile intake and we used this diagram as our guide. Remember that the first step in the mobile intake process is to create a form request in the scheduler. And remember that you can think of a form request like a digital clipboard that has your client's name along with the specific mobile intake and consent forms that you want your client to fill out before their visit. In order to complete this first step, we first need to set up those mobile intake and consent forms, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to first walk you through setting up your digital intake forms in this video, and then in the next video, I'll walk you through setting up your digital consent forms. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the Centerpiece scheduler and get started. Now, just to refresh your memory, the way we complete step 1 of creating a form request with the mobile intake and consent forms for a client is by first clicking the ellipsis button here under the mobile forms column. After the form request opens, my next step is to select the specific mobile intake and consent forms that I want to include in this form request. And I'm going to select which of these forms I send the client based on the services they are receiving for this appointment. When I click to select my intake forms, however, notice that I don't have any, and that's because I haven't set any of them up yet. So let's close out of this and go set up our mobile intake forms. To do that, all I need to do is click right here on the mobile intake link. Next, notice that the task pane is currently collapsed, which gives me more viewable space here, but hides my tasks. To toggle this open, all I need to do is click right here, and now I can see all of the tasks that are available for this page. Notice in the task pane that I have a button to link to my intake forms and a button to link to my consent forms. Okay, so let's click on the intake forms button and notice that I don't have any intake forms. To create our first intake form, I'll simply click on the new intake form button right here. Next, notice that I have 4 templates to choose from. These templates correspond to each type of intake form in Centerpiece. So we're going to want to create a digital form for each of these 4 intake forms. Setting up the forms is super quick and easy, so let's walk through that right now. Since we need to create all of them, I'm just going to go in order and select this first one here, the contact information form. The process of creating the forms is the same for all of them, so let's walk through that now. Notice that you first have the ability to give each form a custom name. I'm going to go ahead and accept the default name, but we'll walk through adding a custom name in just a second. Also notice that I can make the form active or inactive. Only active forms will show up in the drop-down list on the form request page, so if you want to temporarily hide a form from showing up in the list, you could uncheck this and make it inactive. Okay, next you can see all of the questions that are on this form. Also notice that I have the option to display or hide each question, and I also have the ability to make the question required or not. So let's say that I want to keep all of the questions on this form, but I do want to make the email address required so the client can't submit the form without first filling out their email address. To do that, I'll simply scroll down to the email address, and then I'll toggle this to required. And then next, notice here on the bottom that I can choose to lock the form so no one else other than me can make changes to this form. I'm not going to do that, but the option is there if you decide you want to lock the form. Okay, so to finish up, I'll click Save and Close, and notice my form is displayed in the grid. And that's it. We've just created our first intake form. Okay, so now let's move on and create the case intake information form. I'll select the form and all the intake questions are displayed. I'll scroll down to the bottom and notice these questions here under Partner Information. These refer to the father of the baby, so if a male client was coming in, I wouldn't want to ask these questions. So for this form, I'm actually going to make 2 forms, one for female clients and one for male clients. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the female version first. I'll scroll back up and just type in female right here. Then I'm not going to hide any of these questions, and I'm going to choose to make the demographic questions required by toggling those all to required. Okay. Then to finish up, I'll click Save and Close, and you can see my female version right here. Next, I'll quickly do the same thing but create a male version. I'll once again click New Intake Form, and then I'll select the Case Intake Information form, and I'm going to type in male after the name. Now, just like the female version, I'm going to require all of the demographic questions, but for this version, I'm going to hide the partner information questions. So I'll scroll down, and then I'm going to toggle those off to hide them. Okay. Next, I'll click Save and Close, and you can see that I now have a male version of the form. All right, so let's keep going, and let's create the health history form. Now, for this one, notice that I have questions about pregnancy history and gynecological history. So I'm going to want to make a male and female version of this one too. I'll type female for this first one, and then I'm going to scroll down and click Save and Close. I'm going to quickly walk through this process again, but for this one, I'm going to type in male. Then I'm going to toggle off the pregnancy questions so we don't display those, and I'll toggle off these first few gynecological questions, and I'm going to scroll down and keep toggling off any other questions that I don't want to display on the male version. And just remember, the questions that you display or hide are completely up to you. This form is completely customizable. Okay, so to finish up and create the form, I'll just click Save and Close. All right, so we only have one more left. So let's go ahead and create that pregnancy test form. For this one, I'm going to leave everything as is because this form will only be sent to female clients. I'll click Save and Close, and that's it. All of our mobile intake forms have been created. Now let's quickly go back to the scheduler. I'm going to close the task pane so again we have a little more viewable space, and next I'm going to click on the ellipsis button for this client once more. The Forms Request dialog will open, and notice this time when I click under each of these forms, I now have an option to select a form. And you can see that I have two options under the case intake, the female and male versions that we created, and I also have two options under the health history as well. Okay, now remember, when sending out a form request, you don't need to send all of the intake forms. You can omit the forms that your center doesn't use, and you only need to send the forms that are needed for the specific type of appointment that the client has. Okay, so now that all of your intake forms are created, the next step is to create these consent forms, and that's what I'll walk you through in the next video. If you have any questions about how to create your mobile intake forms, please click on the Help tab and view the Setting Up Your Mobile Intake Forms documentation under the Office Management section. And as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need any help. Thanks so much for your time.